I am so pleased to have the opportunity to moderate today's CWAE conversation on building resilience. My name is Kate Schneider Lecy. I'm an assistant professor at Arizona State University in the School of Sustainability, and I am here to just be the guide today to listen to these three very wonderful people who have agreed to come and share their experiences and wisdom with all of us. So today we're going to be talking about resilience. But before we get started, I just wanted to take a moment to honor Maureen Kilkenny, who was a very important figure in our history of CWAE, who passed away recently. She was an active member since 1985. CWAE started in 1981, for those who didn't know. I recently learned that fact. And she was our chair in 1996, contributed a lot to organizing in CWAE's early days, and also made a very significant contribution in her tireless effort to establish the Sylvia Lane Research Mentor Fellowship in 1995. So just on the part of CWAE, we're very grateful for Maureen's decades of service and leadership and the lasting legacy that she leaves through her scholarship, mentorship, and generosity. So we just wanted to take a moment to honor her and acknowledge how saddened we are by her passing. And with that, I'm going to turn over to our topic of the day, which is resilience. This is a somewhat nebulous topic, and we're going to grapple with that vagueness in this conversation. So I'm not going to set us out with an introduction that says, here's our definition of resilience. But today we're going to try and examine it from multiple angles, and we have three esteemed panelists who are here to do that by sharing their wisdom with us. Anne Byrne is an assistant teaching professor in the Cornell Brooks School of Public Policy and a former research economist at the USDA Economic Research Service, and has made a lot of contributions in her short career so far, with lots more to come. Mary Bohman is blissfully retired from a long career in federal government service, including as administrator of the USDA Economic Research Service and most recently acting director the Bureau of Economic Analysis during the COVID-19 pandemic. So I'm sure retirement is really lovely after that. And Norbert Wilson needs no introduction, as he's former president of AAEA and well known to everyone on this call, I'm sure. He is a professor in the Duke University Divinity School and director of the Duke World Food Policy Center. So it's my incredible pleasure to welcome these three panelists, and with a lot of gratitude that you are dedicating your time to be here with us and willingness to share your experiences. We have about an hour for this conversation. We'll end on the hour, and then we have an informal mentorship conversation. We'll stop the recording, and the panelists will stick around as much as they are able, and we invite the attendees to stick around as well and have an open conversation. So to get us started, I would like to ask everybody to reflect on what resilience means to you. And we didn't establish an order in which people want to answer. So please, whoever is, fastest at the unmute, please go ahead.
I can get started as the senior member or oldest member of the panel. And I think resilience is dealing with life's speed bumps, and they are little, cracks in the road, and sometimes big ones where your tire gets stuck and it's hard to push it out. And they're in your personal life, professional life, and they never end. Even in retirement, life will deal you some big and small speed bumps. And I think over time you build your ability to deal with things that come at you, but it's a skill that is just so needed in getting through life.
I'm happy to go next. And before we get into this conversation, I just want to say what an honor it is to be on a panel with two of my role models, mentors, not, people who are rock stars from my vantage point. And so it's really an honor to be here with Norbert and Mary. I was thinking about this, what is resilience question, and I actually had a conversation with somebody about food assistance the other day and the emergency food assistance or the emergency food plan that the USDA disaster manual specifies. And it talks about all of these different programs that come into play when an emergency happens. And I think, sometimes we think about things being duplicative or programs operating in isolation, but really they come together and work together when there's a need and when something big happens. And I think about personal resilience in the same way, like how do I show up as things get bumpy, as Mary said, and how do I rely on the people around me to move forward?
Um, I am really just glad that people still talk to me. So I'm just glad to be a part of the conversation. So thank you. I had a roommate when I was in college, my senior year. He was from Japan, and as a parting gift, he gave me this pair of beer glasses from Japan. Um, and the kanji, it said fall down 7 times, get up 8. And I didn't know that phrase at the time, and I've always loved it. And that there's this reality that we will fall down. Things happen, and we have to make a choice. And it's not always easy. And there are lots of reasons why it's not easy to get up that 8th time, but it is what it means to keep moving forward. So I love that phrasing, and I find it useful.
Thank you all. Can you tell us how you balance the demands in your personal and professional life when it comes to resilience? How do you find it in both places and balance that? We can go in the same order, or I can start calling on you. Norbert looks like he's ready to answer this one.
Well, I was going, I'll gladly go. Um, I was thinking about this question, and I mean, from our previous conversation, and I've come to a decision about this in that I think these are overlapping realities. Our professional and our personal resilience, they can come from from similar sources, right? But then I start thinking about, and maybe I shouldn't rank them, but in this sense, if I fall down at work or if there's some problems, it can hurt some folks, right? We're part of connected systems. Um, but if I fall down in my own personal life, I have a child, I have a wife, I have older parents who are, living their best lives, but it's 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 part of the reality of growing older that things aren't always perfect. And so I realize there's an importance of making sure that the personal affairs, the resiliency really does live there. And I don't want to ignore what's happening professionally, but I'm trying to find ways of making sure that that part of my life I can bounce back from, or that I have the supports to do that. And I definitely want to see that in my professional life, but I got to keep the home fires burning, and so I prioritize that in a sense.
I'll follow you, Norbert, because I think my comment builds on that, in that, I'm 67 now. My career is over, which is great. Retirement is fun, but I have never thought, as I look back, gosh, I wish I would have spent less time with family. My parents are deceased. I value every minute I spent with them, and I wish it could have been more. So I think that really resonates with me, that you need to have a priority for the people around you, and you depend on them too. I think that that's really key. One of my moments of resilience was early in my career. I was just, not motivated, trying to figure out how do I get some stuff done that it wasn't my favorite topic or thing I wanted to do. And I called my mom. And I was complaining, and my mom raised 8 kids, and she just said, Mary, sometimes you have to tough it out. And I think about that a lot. And my mom was a very lovely, sweet person. She wasn't just like, oh my God, quit bothering me. So I do think it's a two-way street, and you get more from your personal and family relationships to support your professional career than you give back usually.
Yeah, I mean, I want to echo just the importance of prioritizing both your own health and those really core relationships. I talk to my brother like 3 times a week on the phone. And he's been in my life since I was born. I mean, he's a really important relationship in my life. We have totally different work lives. We live in totally different parts of the country, but that is a super important connection that I rely on and that I know he relies on. And so I wouldn't give that up. And I think it helps me remind myself of who I am and where I came from in a way that allows me to show up professionally, but also show up personally.
Yeah, I just add, and you make a good point about health. I think
Mhm.
that's something that you can't also need to invest in is getting exercise, eating right. And those are also ways to meet people outside your work circles that can all be part of this resilience and also joy in life that you get over the years.
That's a great segue into our next question, which I think is, where we want to spend a lot of today's discussion. So I don't think you guys need to do like one single round robin, but feel free to react to each other's comments and keep going here. I want to ask how you make yourself more resilient, and this is partly a practical advice section of our conversation, and it's partly something deeper about, what keeps you grounded? What keeps you motivated? How do you harness that and your deep truths, especially when it's really hard to get yourself out of bed that morning?
Yeah, I mean, I can start here. I think part of what motivates me is knowing how it's been when I haven't been resilient, and thinking about those times and thinking that's not a place I want to go back to. I think there is something that happens naturally over time with building resilience and having experiences, and you hit more of those speed bumps, you learn how to navigate them a little bit more easily. But I think part of what motivates me is just experience, of not always being resilient. Yeah.
I'll jump in and I be a little Anne makes a good point, and I think there are ways you can build skills that help you navigate things over time. And for me, at the top of the list is communication. A lot of these speed bumps involve needing to talk to someone or a misunderstanding or even someone, who you feel like is out to get you. I mean, these are things that cause stress and even just external traumas such as illnesses or crises in someone you care about or your own life require you to communicate with people. And these are skills you can build.
Mhm.
My first job out of college was in the Peace Corps in West Africa, and we had a lot of training on things that made you resilient. It was, a difficult situation to meld into a completely different culture. And we had a whole training on giving and receiving feedback that has served me very well in life. How do you how does someone communicate with you, and how can you respond when they're raising some concerns or maybe praise, and vice versa? And this is something I think everyone should invest in. Most universities or workplaces offer training. Sometimes it's in the guise of having a good performance review or, dealing with students. So I think that's one communication skill. Another is being a good negotiator. How do you figure out how to resolve a problem in a constructive way that's not like he said, she said, or, a back
Mhm.
and forth, which doesn't usually result in a good outcome and adds to stress. So I a big believer in the book Getting to Yes. It's a short book I recommend, or taking a training in that, vein of principled and not back and forth kind of who can knock each other out type of negotiation. So I've invested in those skills, and they are still being put to good use in retirement.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, I really do appreciate the framing that you all have provided. And I will say on a personal level, and I realize people have different sort of worldviews on this. For me, my faith tradition has been an important source for me to come back when things have gone astray, and also even in the good times too. So I think it's been an important grounding, because one of the things that this tradition, and lots of traditions will help with this, is to understand what is our role in this world. Who are we and what matters to us? And that our job does not define us. It doesn't determine our worth. And so for those reasons, I know that my value is way beyond whatever job I have today or will have tomorrow or when I don't have a job. And so for those things, I think it's really important to invest in whatever allows you to find that grounding that matters to you. I think that's been an important part. And I'll say another thing that's been important is thinking also about my family. And I don't mean just my immediate family, but thinking about my ancestors. And there's a phrase that's come up in my family, do you know, and this is connecting also to the faith tradition, do you know how many prayers have been prayed for you by your grandparents, right? Or even other people? And the imagination that ancestors who lived through really challenging times, to imagine one day that there would be someone like me who would be able to do the things that I've been able to do. I can't just say, oh, well, I can't, oh, it's too hard now. I mean, there are folks who've had it, and they've struggled through so much more. And I'm so grateful to all those people who've laid the groundwork. Not everyone was a saint, Lord knows. And yet these folks laid a groundwork that I could be here and that my kid could be here. And I hope that I'm doing the same for someone else. And so for all those things, it is really understanding that there's something bigger than me, and that I'm not the center of this story.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that really gets, I mean, that's such a powerful statement. And I think something that it reminds me of is just like the power and the diversity of our communities. And,
Yeah.
I think of a moment where I wasn't feeling particularly resilient, and I have a cousin who's an artist, and we were texting about it. And she goes, do you think it would help to create something? Like, do you think
Yeah.
some creativity would be helpful right now? And I thought to myself, yeah, I do actually. I think making an elaborate meal or painting a picture or doing something that feels really creative would actually fill some of the holes that I'm feeling right now. And that kind of messaging came from the fact that she has a very different perspective than I do. And I think having a community with a diversity of perspectives is really, really helpful.
Mm.
Yeah, I think that is a great advice, and the things that, keep you healthy can build these communities outside of your profession. But I also just want to throw in that building your professional community is really valuable. I think especially as you launch your career, as a graduate student, as a young faculty, or working in the federal or other government or private sector, you've got to build your community. And AAEA did not pay me to say this, but it's, joining something like
Yeah.
AAEA. But I think when you're young, joining a section, maybe a
Yeah.
regional association
Hmm.
where the meetings are a little smaller. If you see something on a topic, a special conference, that could be a good way to meet people who are working in your area, who give you insights, and I think can be a way to get you build your confidence in the work that you're doing and get feedback. Give seminars in your on presentations where you work, maybe get invited somewhere, but really build that professional network of people who you'll probably work with or interact with for the rest of your career and make, make some connections that are very meaningful to you personally as well as professionally.
I want to pick up on that point, Mary, and take it a little bit further, and then I want to talk about another type of network of people that we need to keep in mind. I cannot say how important the AAEA has been, and it wasn't always the case. There were some rough moments there. I want to be honest that I was like, why am I going to this? I don't feel connected, yada yada yada. But one of the things I learned both from sticking it out with AAEA and also some of the other groups. So I was a member of ITRAC, the International Ag Trade Research Consortium. I think that's it. For a number of years when I was doing international trade, and I actually found both of them really important to make connections, to find people that were doing the kind of work that I was doing, and actually made friendships out of that. And that was really important because I discovered that those were the people who were, and not that there's anything sort of nefarious, but like these are the people who are going to read your papers. These are the people who are going to know what you're doing, and they can give you guidance. And I've learned so much about how to write better and how to think differently by going to those conferences and seeing how to make those arguments. And so it wasn't just this sort of faceless, oh, well, this person's doing this work. It was actually knowing them to understand how to write and how to think differently about these projects. So I think building out those relationships are important, but that kind of connects to this other idea of building out friendships. Actually, just read this article in the New York Times about, and I realize this is CWAE, but we men, we don't do a good job of keeping good, healthy friendships going into our adulthood. And I will just say it is really important to have friends beyond our work. Make friends in work, that's important, but having friends, I have a dear, dear friend. We just went on a trip, and it's so critical for us to be able to communicate, to be able to talk about our lives, our families, what's going well or what's going wrong in our jobs, and not to sort of offload it only on my spouse, but that I have other folks who I can really engage and who actually care for me, and being able to care for them. I'm also learning new ways of building out resilience that I can't do in isolation. So I just think this is fully support making connections.
Yeah. Yeah, I wanted to build on the AAEA component and just a couple thoughts on how I think interacting with AAEA can be so powerful. And part of it is getting to know those people you see as rock stars. Part of it is also supporting
Yeah.
the other people who are new to the organization, and those peer networks I think are so important. And the people that you're in grad school with or in school with or entering the workforce with are really, really important connections. And I think and connections is, that makes it sound maybe a little bit more businessy than what I mean, but they're really important relationships to foster.
Oh, Mary,
Mary,
you're
you're muted.
muted.
Norbert, you jogged a memory for me. One of my dearest friends now of 40 years was someone I first met through a Davis connection where I went to graduate school, then the trade consortium. We went to meetings and our husbands are friends and we're going to visit them next week
Oh,
and
that's
spend
awesome.
time with them. And yeah, and it's very meaningful. It really enriches your life.
Yeah. If I may, on this point, that made me think of hearing you say that made me think of I made some connections through the various associations with some senior folks, and I'm saying this as someone who's now more senior and thinking about how do I do the same for others because it builds out the resiliency when you are able to put things in perspective and we're able to sort of help other folks. It does something for you, and not that we do it for our own self benefit, but there are these benefits that do come. And I think of people like Rob King, who has retired from Minnesota, was just a kind person and just opened up some pathways for me. I mean, I did ask a question, and he was like, "Well, you ought to consider this. And that got me involved in the AAEA in ways that were really meaningful and that have helped me through the difficult times because then I had um, contacts that I could call to understand like how do I navigate this? Who do I talk to if I have this challenge? And I definitely want to come back to that a little bit later. But I hope that I'm doing that to some degree to some of the junior folks as I move into my latter years. So
Yeah. Yeah, giving back, I think, that is something you can do in different ways throughout your career. If someone
yeah.
calls you up and wants to talk, you won't regret making time for that or saying, hey, can we do this tomorrow? Let's, if it will that work for you? And then, resilient, I think I said, it's harder when you're young. You don't have a lot lived experience or to draw on, but do reach out to people and be there for each other. Things like getting your first paper rejected or, having a student just I started my career as an academic. It was just very difficult and, making criticizing you or being disruptive. There's people there, your faculty colleagues, or even just someone you knew in grad school. And like you said, Norbert, don't bring it all home. It's, find these colleagues and then they'll call you. And I think you'll learn from people's problems and help, talking things through. It's a two-way network. So I do think not holding it in and reaching out to someone is really builds these skills, but allows you to give back from the very beginning.
I've learned so much from this, and just to Norbert's earlier point that you hope you've done this for the next generation, I can attest for sure. Personally, you have. I think Anna and I would both say that we're each sitting with one of our own mentors, at least one, in this call here. So I feel very fortunate. We've had some really thoughtful questions come up in the chat that I think really build on this conversation. And I'm just curious, I'm going to combine two questions here, but are there ways in which you need to modify the way in which you go about building those connections in professional versus personal, both in which ways that feed your ability to be resilient, but do you have different types of boundaries? How do you balance kind of
Mm.
transparency and relationship building when you're in a professional setting? And do you have kind of different techniques when you're kind of just in your personal life?
Well, I'll start, since I'm at that point where I only have a personal life. Um, I think that the less it's more similar than you think, and at some level, there is no difference. And the key is really being true to yourself and being the person that you are at work, at home,
Mhm.
and really, just being honest with people, having values, sharing those values with people, both friends, family, and work colleagues, and living those same values makes your life easier. And just because you're not you don't need to be two people. And if you really, if that's proving to be a challenge, I think that's something to talk to someone about or try and figure out how to work through that. Because the more you are the same and you're using the same skills and talents, and being honest with people, the more you're going to thrive over time.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. It reminds me, there's a Mark Twain quote that I'm totally going to get wrong, but it basically is something along the lines of, I'm too disorganized or I'm too forgetful to lie. Like, and I think that there's a lot of wisdom there about being, consistent with yourself about your values and carrying that into both versions of the world that you walk through.
I think this is really important. And I said something, I'm going to kind of pull it back a little bit because of something you said, Kate, about transparency. Um, our work and the people at work aren't necessarily our friends. That's not a negative thing. That's just these are relationships that matter, but some things we need to make sure we don't share at work. And I know there's been a movement of being our authentic selves in the workplace, and I'm not questioning the idea of being authentic, but there is real care we need to take in going into our workplaces. And I've seen people overshare in work settings, and it doesn't go well. It actually, I think, does the opposite of building resiliency. I think it creates opportunities for problems. And so I just encourage people to think, to be mindful of that. My father-in-law worked in HR, and he's very clear. And then from an HR perspective, there's some real reason to be very careful about how you share what you share about your personal lives, because it's none of yeah, it's not people's business, and it could also disadvantage you in ways. Not to say you can't have a real friend at a workplace, but just being mindful of who you share and what you share with people.
We've had a
But I can,
request for something more specific in the
okay.
chat. I don't know if you can give some examples of kind of how do you know where is that line?
Ooh, okay. I will say I've also learned, and the unfortunate reality I recognize this can be gendered, and I want to be careful about how I approach this. I mean, talking with my wife and listening to her think about how she wants to move in the workspace as compared to me, I realize that everything isn't equal. But I'm aware of talking about the sort of healthcare issues or family issues, good or bad, can be tricky in the workplace. I mean, we know that there are things you can't ask in an interview, and sometimes I think it's important to also make sure we don't overshare in those settings because people judge. And even if they don't mean to, there are ways that we do this. So I don't have a hard line of like, you don't say this. But I do believe we just need to think about how could that information be perceived and used, and what are the ways that we can protect ourselves. I'm not saying lie that you don't have a family if you do, or whatever the case may be, or whatever your family is, that you need to necessarily keep that a secret. By no means am I saying that, but be mindful of how you do talk about that. And that is not from official HR. So I encourage you to talk to your own HR office to make sure you abide by their rules. So
Yeah, and I think, Norbert, you build this over time. You're going to
yeah,
sometimes overshare. Don't worry. I mean,
yeah,
that just
that's right.
happens.
Yeah.
And, I'm a generally a private person. So, you gotta figure out, what makes sense and what doesn't. And sometimes you hear someone, you're like, oh, maybe I didn't need to know that, and you're like, okay, but that's okay. They may be having a day and let's
Yeah,
not
that's right.
overjudge. But I
Yeah.
think you make a good point about work being different and that but you have to build relationships with people you work with. They're not going to be your friends per se, but you need to understand how they communicate, recognize that they have lives too. And
Yeah.
I think that that's something that I learned over time is someone may be gruff or say something you wonder, well, where did that come from? It has usually nothing to do with you. Maybe their kid is having a bad day or
Mm.
who knows what? They had terrible traffic commuting to work. You just have to roll with the punches, but you do have to build enough of relationships with people at work that you can manage that kind of ups and downs and be able to communicate with everyone.
Yeah, I think as far as like a little bit of advice for how to think about the boundaries, to me, part of it is like, what is our objective here? And when I'm at home, I have very different objectives than when I'm at work. And when I'm at work, it's about serving students, serving the mission of the university, and meeting certain goals. And so that, is what I'm sharing or is the information that I'm providing and communicating useful to that mission or not, I think can be a way to kind of calibrate.
Mhm. Mhm.
I'm going to change directions just slightly and ask you to think about kind of different stages of career. A lot of people who come to these webinars are those of us who are still kind of in the early stages of our career. And I think some more senior people have asked and some more junior people have asked in the chat here about, how you specifically give advice in the earlier to people in the earlier parts of their career about how to build resilience and how can maybe the more senior members of the profession help to support early career people's resilience.
Yeah, I can start as the more junior person here. I think, gosh, great mentors have been so incredibly valuable to me. And I think you can't pay it back, so pay it forward. But I think just acknowledging the power of great mentorship and what that looks like. But I think also understanding that the nature of both technology and communication changes quickly and is changing really rapidly. And so the realities that somebody is facing, even 5 years displaced from where you're at, can look totally different. And so I think that goes back for me to that, having those mentors is super important, but also having those peers is super important.
I'll pick up on this and that. So, as a junior scholar, I mentioned, Rob King. I think of Julie Caswell as also someone who was important for my career development. Gave me advice in different ways. And it wasn't always about a single paper. It was more about how do you navigate this stage. And so I say that there's something important. And I mentioned these two people at different institutions than the one where I was because it's about building up networks of folks. And I had great colleagues when I was at Auburn and at Tufts, and I can also name some of those folks too. But my point is, it's also about reaching out and trying to find those mentors who are not necessarily your immediate space, but that play an important role. And I got to say, as someone who's been a part of tenure promotion processes over the last several years, these are the folks who are going to write letters. I mean, in the academic space. So having connections, and it's not about making them your best friend, but just allowing them to know who you are, for them to understand your work, how you think about it is a critical part. So I want to put that to the side and just say, I think there are two things that have helped me navigate, especially the junior years when I got the rejections for the paper or for the grant proposal. One, it was having, and I keep talking about other folks, but I'm just going to say this. It's really important about having that network of peers, of other folks who are at a similar stage, and allowing innovative ideas to come across and work with folks and build up those relationships. I will say I was really blessed to have, and I will mention another name, Greg Traxler, who was a faculty member at Auburn, was an important mentor to me. And he brought me onto grants and took me on projects where I was not probably the best person in the world to be on that project, but it was really an acculturation that took place. He was trying to bring me into the fold, if you will, and he was intentional. And I'm so grateful to Greg. Ultimately, we ended up doing some work, but I think the sort of personal development that came out of that was just critical. I'm so grateful for people who took the time and invested the money. I mean, even if it didn't turn into a paper or a grant, the personal growth was really critical.
Well, I think I'll add that one thing I gained from years of experience and also leadership in research is that your good ideas get out there. And you may get rejections or you may not get a grant funded but keep at it. I mean, these things that you get, go give the same paper or get some, maybe just one thing that's missing. But I really do think all good ideas eventually find a home. And, sometimes more than you imagine. I remember someone telling me they had an AAEA conference paper rejection that ended up being published in the AER, the economics flagship journal. There's lots of stories out there of
Yeah.
stuff like that. And then the other thing, which is kind of both career advancement, but I think builds resilience because you got to do new things and see that you can be successful, is raise your hand to try something new. Like you did with Greg, he asked you, you could have said no.
Yeah.
And like, oh, this isn't a good fit, it's not in my 5-year plan, but those things can really make a difference. In working with someone on a project in a role that's a little different, you'll learn stuff. And you got to manage things and not get too far afield. But
Yeah.
I think there's really ways to raise your hand that both advance your career and build your resilience.
Yeah. Oh, can I just add to that? The pivot is always critical. I mean, and we pivot. I've had a couple of different careers in my academic life, and I'm grateful for it. And it's not for everybody. But learning to say, I'm going to move on to something else, and being okay with it, taking the adventure, taking the plunge, can be in a critical way. And now that's not to say that there aren't times when you need to just stick it out and say, I'm going to keep pushing on this thing. I do want to raise something, and it kind of came up in a couple of different ways. Um, the nasty reviewer. I think we just need to make a little space for that. Reviewer number two, whatever we want to call it. And all I gotta say is, just put that to the side. And that's also true when dealing with student evaluations. Holy moly, I have seen some words said, and I thought, I can't be that bad of a person, right? So I think it's important that we find ways of I'm careful about saying compartmentalize, but there are ways that we have to just contain that when there are things that are just out of pocket, that are just inappropriate. And I have had to really carefully look at how I review papers and think like, how is this going to land with somebody? Because I know that especially in the early part of your career when you're trying to figure it out and you get someone who says something that is just outlandish. I mean, I'm seeing, I can only laugh now because I couldn't believe someone said that. It was like, who says stuff like this? But I say that to say it can be that ridiculous. And so understand that, put it aside. A good editor will help you navigate this. I've actually had, and I'm going to say this, I've had people who were in positions to sort of evaluate these kinds of things say, look, we know this person does that. And so don't let that bother you. We understand what we're dealing with when we're dealing with that kind of situation. So there are people who do understand, and they're not going to just let you get sort of targeted when someone decides they're, that's the way we ought to handle professional communication.
Yeah, I think that's a really great point. I wanted to add to that words of wisdom that were shared with me years ago that stuck, where you can say something once, you have no control over how many times it repeats in somebody's head. And that goes for things that are positive and that goes for things that are negative. And so, especially when you're writing reviews or, but also the way you try to communicate, remember that it may repeat itself.
Yeah.
And this is something that I've gotten better at over time. I think I may have written a harsh review earlier in my career that I would be embarrassed by, right now, if you're like, oh my God. But, the skill of being able to give positive comments and, we all have a sense of humor. We have this snarky thing that would be the perfect comeback. Can I just say, don't go there? Just really think about how you would want to be treated. And, it carries over throughout life. We moved after I retired to Fort Collins. We moved into an HOA. I've never lived in an HOA. People say things, you're just like, well, let me see how I can help you here. And I think that, and you think about people who did that to you, it's something you work on over time. I wasn't where am now many years ago, and but I think working on how you give people positive comments or picking out the thing that went well, always start something with, hey, this was really great, and engage in a conversation. And then, but we could make it better by looking at X, Y, or Z, or was there something you wish you could have done here that you didn't get to do? Getting a conversation going, and you're not going to do that with the snarky comment. The person, and because when someone gives you that, also you got to step back and say, okay, how can I get this conversation back on track?
Yeah.
I want to go back to something that Norbert said a moment ago because it actually spoke to a question that was in the chat, and just ask if you all have want to take another moment to reflect on when how do you tell, what are the signs that it's time to stick it out or it's time to pivot? And maybe it's not either or, but like what are the signals internally, externally that you look for?
Mm.
And I'll speak at once.
Good
I,
question.
It is a really
yeah.
good question. Yeah.
I mean, I'll just say I think you kind of everyone's different. And I think this is a very personal thing.
Yeah.
So, and our lives are complicated. We have, partners, we have families, we have different financial situations that put
Mhm.
boundaries on the kinds of choices we can make. We're closer to retirement, that gives you more options, but maybe you need to stick it out a year to have the resources you need. So I think it's really something that is gonna vary over time for individuals and as well across people. And I don't know that there's a good answer to that, but I do think you should be thinking about how you can give yourself more options. By these networks you build, by being productive in your job, making sure you're advancing in the ways that our profession values in different career paths. And if that's not happening, there's probably a sign to do some deep thinking, but I think you've got to build that broader organizational or individual resilience because it is very personal when you move on.
Mhm. All this, and I see some people are putting things in the chat, and I think that's really helpful. I would say again, making really big shifts. It shouldn't be done in isolation. I mean, you've got to make the final decision, but I think there is a need to talk to trusted friends, colleagues, partners, whatever the case may be, to help sort through. Because the thing when you do run into those, when I run into those things, I have to kind of see, am I just hurt? Or is this something that I do need to move on because this opportunity has come to an end? And like that's okay. I sometimes that's the way life is. I would say on the other side, and I'm grateful, Mary, about how you kind of talked about raising your hand. And sometimes it's just, I hate to say luck, but you've got to be available. And there are things that make you available. It's doing the work, doing the day to day that allows people to realize you are competent and capable. Chances open up in weird and amazing ways. I cannot explain some of the things that have happened in my life, and I'm just grateful for doing the input putting the input in that I did. But I realized there were lots of other things that shaped that. I mean, yeah, I'll just say we've got to do the work, but things happen and it opens up in ways that we can't anticipate. And that's when pivots can occur. And it's just being available, being ready.
We're getting towards the end of the time, and we've had such tremendous engagement in the chat. I want to ask you all if, in our closing 10 minutes here, you'd be willing to share a moment when your resilience was put to the test and kind of how you found your way through that.
Well, I'll start. Towards the end of my career, I had been at ERS as the administrator head for almost 8 years. And it was during the first Trump administration. And I went to what I thought was going to be a regular meeting and I got reassigned, like, you know, and walked out of there, with a new job and, also realizing that it wasn't so good about ERS either. And, what do you do at a time like that? Well, that's like a sudden, jolt to the system. Well, I think you build on all these things we've been talking about. You reach out to people, made a few phone calls, including to my husband. You go home and, talk to friends and sort of get a perspective. You figure out how you can support those around you. And that gives you a lot of I was 60 then, so I had some of these skills in the networks, but it was a big shock. And then you just, I took some time off, recharge yourself, but then move on to the next thing, which ended up being, a good, really wonderful way to end my career. I went to the Animal Plan Health Inspection Service for 6 months, and then someone I knew brought me over to the Bureau of Economic Analysis, where I spent the last 4 years of my career. And it was great to see that these leadership skills I had built in one context could really be successful in another way. And yes, it wasn't what way I was expecting to end my career, but I think that the culmination of, building networks, having people, having good personal, ways to deal with things and friends I could count on really got me through that. And it ended up being a good thing. No, it was not a good thing. I don't want to go there, but there ended up being good moments that came out of it.
Yeah.
Anyone
I'll go
like
ahead then.
Sorry.
I this was a question I thought a good bit about, and um, I, I realized that as you progress through your career, there'll be some opportunities that will be made available to you, and you'll say yes to some of these. And in saying yes, you realize what a mess you've stepped into, and you didn't know it. You thought, "Oh, this is so cool. Oh my gosh, I can't believe I'm in this situation." And I say that to say there were times in the process of dealing with some of the changes and some of the things I was dealing with that I had some real questions about, am I the person I think I am? Like there were some things I had to make some decisions that I found really difficult and unpleasant. And one of the things, so there was some self-assessment, and so this again, the network, having friends, family that I could talk to, even talking to someone professionally. I mean, those are important things to keep in mind. The other thing I'll say is I discovered that at different institutions, there are networks and structures in place to help you navigate these things, be it an ombuds person or something else where there are times you really do need the support of others to help you know how to navigate, how to stay within the legal bounds, how to stay within. Sometimes it's not even the legal issues, it's the ethical and social issues that you need to know the institution and how it runs. It will throw you. I mean, these things will fundamentally throw you, and you are questioning. Let me put it in person. I questioned, like, who am I? And this is not what I thought I was going to be doing, or this is not what I thought. And again, it was going back to home base and going back to those things that are important. And also realizing that my wife did this work where she ended up interviewing all these different religious leaders, and there was this one who said, "They're not out. They're not against you. They're just for themselves." And that really like changed my worldview in such a fundamental way. Is that there are folks who have no concept of how what they're doing is affecting you, and they're just thinking about their own needs or whatever. And sometimes that's completely outlandish, and sometimes it's just the way life is. All that's to say, getting that perspective was really important, and finding those infrastructure, that infrastructure that was in place to help me navigate some of those complicated things. that was above my pay grade, that there was no way I was going to solve, and being okay with that. And I realized there are sometimes when that's not available as well. And so, yeah, I just wish you well during those difficult times.
Yeah, this is this is a tough question because I think there's both the personal resilience and the professional resilience, and over the past 15, 20 years, there have been bumps that I think that I've experienced personally and that I've experienced with folks on this call. And so I'll choose one and talk about that. But I just also want to acknowledge that it's a question I think everybody could answer in deep and personal ways, and recognize that folks have been resilient, and we want to honor the resilience that people have demonstrated and brought. Yeah, so when I was in my senior year of college, my mother was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, and I told my professor who I was TAing for, I'm not sure how this semester is going to look for me because of this. And he sat me down and he said, this is a serious thing, and I'm going to offer you a lot of grace, and you're going to move through this however you move through this. But it was somebody within that institution that I think led me to realize that it was serious. And she passed away the following May, and my education was disrupted in ways that I had not anticipated. But I think being able to reach out to people and being able to kind of return to who am I, and how do I want to move forward, like Norbert said, that was critical. And I think when you have moments that make you question your identity, which some of these bumps really can, they can really get at this question of like, who am I? How do I identify? Returning to the things that make you know who you are, and whether those are people or places or activities or fields of study, returning to the things that help you see who you are, I think is the most powerful thing. And I think having that sense of self and that sense of your values is what carries you through.
Thank you all so much for sharing from your personal and professional experiences. I think this has been a very different webinar than some of the ones we've had in the past. And I'm really grateful to you all because, we asked you where's the boundary between personal and professional, and then I asked you all these questions that asked you to really bring your personal selves and really make yourselves vulnerable in this conversation. And I'm so grateful that the three of you were willing to do that. And I hope that everyone has gotten a lot out of this conversation, and also that, we have provided a model that it's okay to have these conversations because we all struggle. We all struggle a lot. And it's valuable to be able to lean on each other privately and publicly, like we were able to do with today's conversation. So I just want to express my deep gratitude to our three panelists for joining us in this conversation, for making this conversation possible by sharing from your lives.